From MeatEater's World News headquarters in Bozeman, Montana, this is Cal's Week in Review with Ryan Cal Callahan. Here's Cal.
Hey, Cal's Week in Review fans, you are about to hear an interview with Julie Lucas of Mining, Minnesota. Julie was a fantastic guest, and as you'll hear, she is the executive director, the face of Mining, Minnesota, as in the face of mining in Minnesota, the trade association for mining. As such, one of her clients is Twin Metals, the extractive interest that intends to operate on the boundary of the Boundary Waters Canoe Area, our most visited wilderness in the lower 48. You know that we should be hearing on whether or not the mineral withdrawal will be canceled under the Biden administration. There is a 20-year mineral withdrawal moratorium put in place, which is now being contested. And Secretary Rollins has claimed that she's going to reverse that decision. We get a lot of requests to have representatives from the industry side of the aisle on the show. I think Julie did a fantastic job. As you listen, we do get to the heart of the matter of whether or not Twin Metals gets to develop this contested area in the Superior National Forest. And I thought it would be worthwhile to bring it up front, as it's a little subtle in the interview. This is national forest. As such, it is a land of many uses. Many interests get to have their say. The question at the heart of this issue, should this particular interest outweigh all others? Then you can consider all the other points, some of which we'll be bringing up here too. I can't wait to hear what you have to say on this one. Please write in, ASKCAL, that's AskCal at themeateater.com. All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Cal the Wild. We have a special guest with us this week, Julie Lucas, who is the executive director of Mining, Minnesota. I think, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And we have talked a lot off and on about Boundary Waters Canoe Area and the Twin Metals project and Cripes Pebble Mine and lots of other projects around the world and America and old projects, new projects. And we always get the feedback that says, hey, we should have someone more connected with the industry and hear more from industry perspective versus what we've had, which is typically like a user perspective, conservation group, and some administration, state or federal level. So Julie has been in the news. Yeah, you're a quoted individual, and Mining, Minnesota. From my take, I would say it is a consulting group,
Trade association.
but it is the trade association. Okay.
For all things not iron. So copper, nickel, manganese, and helium currently.
And that rolls perfectly into my first question that I think everybody should enjoy. Non-ferrous versus ferrous.
Yes. So in Minnesota, we've had iron mining for 140 years now. And so the Iron Mining Association is well established. Well, they have a trade association for the iron mines up here. So I live on the Iron Range. We have 6 operating iron mines, and you'll hear them called taconite mines. It's just a different term. But then we have newer into the world is the non-ferrous. So I tease the Iron Mining Association executive director. I'm like, it's Kristen and not Kristen. Like I'm not Kristen. It's iron and everything else. And then she just picks on me. But yeah, so our state regulations are actually, we have iron mining rules, then we have the non-ferrous mining rules, and then we have peat mining rules. So it just becomes everything but iron.
Got it. And most recently I shouldn't say most recently, but for the listeners of this show, what you've gotten here most recently, um, the mining permit within the Superior National Forest, uh, what had been put on a moratorium, and we saw that the rescission of that moratorium pop up in the budgetary process for the big beautiful bill, and then that was removed, and now we are in a time where we hear that moratorium has been rescinded again, or
Not
that's the
yet.
plan? Not
That
yet.
the Department of, or excuse me, the Forest Service, Department of Agriculture, who oversees the Forest Service, had indicated that they plan to remove the moratorium. And that's where, like you folks out west, you work under different, like we don't operate under the 1872 mining law in Minnesota. We have leases. So that's kind of just one of the differences. I don't know how much you folks have talked about mining out west. But so in our case, yeah, we need leases to start environmental review. So you have to remove the moratorium, then they have to get the leases back, then they'd have to go through environmental review, then they'd have to go through permitting. And not just federal, there's also state of Minnesota also would do environmental review because we have MEPA, the Minnesota Environmental Protection, and then we have state permitting because we have to have a permit to mine. So there's multiple steps. But yes, the first thing is that moratorium.
Yeah, and that was a Secretary Rollins statement, I
That's
think.
what I saw too. Yep.
Yeah, and then as far as the leases, those leases were turned over, or do those leases still exist?
That I believe is in court right now. So that one
Right.
I can't speak to because I'm pretty sure that one's still tied up in court. It gets incredibly complicated and timelines get incredibly complicated when you go back to the Obama administration, keeping track of
Yeah.
all that.
Yeah, there's a ping pong ball going back and forth here.
Yeah, which is not really how we should do this in our country, but
Um, well, yeah, I'd love some more of that perspective. But for what folks need to know is we have from sportsman, hunter, angler side of things, we've been very interested in the Twin Metals project specifically because of its proximity to our most visited wilderness area in the U.S.
yeah, it's
Um,
amazing.
and what kind of gets lost in that is that there's a lot of existing mining activity in that same general area. Correct?
Yeah, just upstream of that is an iron mine that's currently existing. And we also just have on a stretch almost 100 miles long is the Iron Range with, like I said, the other mining operations, not all in that watershed because where we live, actually just 20 minutes south of me is a three-way watershed divide where two continental divides actually come together. So we have the Rainy River watershed, that's the one Boundary Waters is in. But then we also have the Lake Superior watershed and we have the Upper Mississippi River watershed, and they all come together at a little triple watershed right south of me. So so within that watershed is one iron mine, and then the proposed Twin Metals, and then some exploration projects.
And that's like Bemidji area, right?
Nope. I say that like there's anything wrong with Bemidji. I'm like, no.
Well, that's the
Bemidji's a
spot where you can
beautiful
jump
city.
across
Yeah.
the.
So Bemidji. So so if you're familiar with where Ely is, just at the end of the road on the way to the Boundary Waters, which is the way you're going to go next time you come visit us, then from Ely, if you head an hour, because it's a rural area, right? We measure everything in time versus distance. I couldn't even tell you how many miles it is. So I live about an hour and a half west of Ely, and then 2 hours west of me is Bemidji. So
Got it.
sprawl across the state.
Got it. But yeah, lots of water.
Lots of
Um,
we got land to 10,000 lakes.
yeah,
This is
going
what we do.
a lot of different directions. When last time I was in Bemidji, right? It's like you go jump across the Missouri, or sorry,
Mississippi.
Mississippi. Yep.
Yep. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's you can there's like a little crossing point where you can say you walked across the Mississippi because it's still tiny.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's kind
Love
of
stuff
cool.
like that. Yeah. Um, so I guess what makes the Twin Metals project uh, different and such a kind of political hot potato?
I think a lot of it's just the location. And, when the Boundary Waters was formed back in the day, it was created where it's at, and then just around it is a mineral withdrawal area, or not withdrawal, excuse me, mineral area. So it's like you have the Boundary Waters you can't mine in, but then there's a boundary around it, a buffer that you can't mine around it. And then Twin Metals is south of there, but it is still within the watershed. So it's about 5 miles as a crow flies, but it's about in 16 miles river miles. But it's a mining project with an ore that has sulfide. Sulfide has been known to cause acid rock drainage, and it's a mine being proposed in the watershed of an extremely protected, for a reason, region. And so people are scared, and people have lots of questions and concerns. And so you see it. I wish it wasn't political. It's mineral extraction. We've made it political in our country. I'm trying desperately to peel that back because we all use these metals and we should all care about the environment. Like, caring about the environment should not be a political thing, but mining that creates our world shouldn't be either. So trying to fix that so that it's not tied up, because in mining, environmental review takes many years. From the time you start baseline sampling, because you need to understand groundwater, surface water. From the time you start that to the time you'd ever actually start a mine is a huge long window that lasts beyond political administrations. So how do we not have this ping pong effect is something I'm trying desperately to fix, which is kind of comical because I'm a scientist, not a political scientist. So here we are.
But you can talk to people, so that's you
I
kind
used to be
of.
a teacher, so
There you go.
I think I always just kick into educator mode. I taught biology for 6 years, so I think I just always, oops.
Yeah, it's a talent. And then I often, so I'm a Montana kid, right? And when I think of copper sulfide mining, I'm like Butte, America, big, huge open pit copper sulfide mine. It's full to this day of some really nasty water. Geese land in there and die every year, and I grew up with urban myths, right? Of like, oh yeah, if you took, this is the one that sticks with me, right? Is if you took a railroad tie and dumped it in there, it would disintegrate before it hit the bottom of the pit.
That's fun.
Yeah. So that's what I think of when I'm thinking of copper sulfide mining. But so
Did
one
anyone ever
thing,
do that, actually? I'm just gonna.
well, I mean, even when I was young, there wasn't much of a fence around the thing. So now, yeah.
Now there's a big fence.
Like, is that what we're talking about with this particular project? Like that type of a footprint?
No, so one thing is the proposed Twin Metals project is an underground mine. And one of the other things that, so I actually, one of the reasons that I got into mining was because of the Berkeley pit, and in kind of a backwards way. Because one of the reasons I ever went into water resources science was because of things like the Berkeley pit. And I was hell bent on stopping mining from creating such things. It's a long story on how I still got into mining, coming from it from that perspective. But the Berkeley pit was an open pit, and it was started pre-Clean Water Act. And when they closed up shop, they shut the pumps off, let the pit fill up. And I actually did a research paper on Berkeley pit back in college. But so now you have water that has to be run continuously through a water treatment plant, and they're doing that now and pulling out metals and recycling it. And I don't know how many years that treatment's going to take, but one of the key things is that it's all about the ore body, because not all ore bodies aren't created the same. They're created different processes. Ours are volcanic in origin. They were formed when the earth tried to split itself apart. And so even in our deposits, so we have what's called the Duluth complex, which is the mid-continent rift, tried to yank the earth apart, volcanic intrusions shoved up into our region. Each one of those intrusions has its own chemistry and own what it has in it for metallurgy. So you can't really look at the Berkeley pit because that had pyrite and pyrrhotite, and which are just iron sulfides. And the question is, what do they have for neutralizing any acid generated? Are there silicate minerals? Are there carbonate minerals? And so you can't really compare that with twin. And then like I said, the other thing is twin is underground, which right there changes a lot of things. And then the other thing about northern Minnesota, it's super weird to me. So like I live in a spot, I'm just an hour and a half west of Ely. I have sand down to like 150 feet here. The glacier's like, hey, here you go. Here's all your loamy sand. Where Twin is at, there's like, you've been to the Boundary Waters. There's barely any dirt, right? It's like bedrock. And then what's weird about Minnesota is that you go up to the Boundary Waters, like there's water everywhere, but there's a lot of surface water everywhere. We don't have a groundwater aquifer. If you put in a well by Twin, you actually have to have like a 300-foot well just to have water enough to, like if you were to have a home, you're going to look at a 300-foot deep well. And so there's a lot of water on the surface, but in the groundwater, it's dry. It's so dry, in fact, that where we found helium, there's a reason we have helium naturally occurring is because there's no water in those fractures even. So just helium's been trapped underground for God knows how many millions of years. So there's just all those different factors, like what is the geochemistry, but also just what is the water? And then how are you going to mine? Are you going to be an open pit that fills up? There's ways to still manage acid rock drainage. But in Twin's case, they're an underground mine that starts 400 feet down where it's dry. So there's all those different things to factor in. Because the Berkeley pit, that's the case we all go to, and we all are terrified of that. And that's why when I hear people are scared about Twin, I get it, because that is not what we want there. Like, so I understand those fears.
Yeah, the just reading through your website, right? There's several projects. The helium one is Topaz, correct? Yeah. But the twin metals is described as a surgical operation is what they're going for. And it sounds like in comparison with, let's say, the Sunrise project, it would be very different scale-wise. Sunrise, you guys describe as like a high multi-generational potential.
And so the Sunrise is part of what's called the Partridge River intrusion. So like if you can imagine billion years ago, Earth trying to tear itself apart, different volcanic intrusions. So the Partridge River intrusion was the one the Sunrise deposits in, as well as a North Met deposit, which are both new range copper nickel. And then north is the South Cowichaway intrusion, the ski. And so that one was a completely different event. So the way those two volcanic, I keep wanting to call them eruptions, and they're not eruptions, they're intrusions. I can hear my geologist friends hollering at me. But if you think of the Twin one was very much like almost like a jet up kind of a slope, and it's very concentrated. The metals dropping down onto the granite below. And so you can go in and like they said, it's like surgical. Whereas the other ones, the intrusions came up and they're just more separated, and they're the deposit is more valuable near surface. So that one you'd have to have an open pit to make it make sense. Twins deposit, they're proposed to mine 400 feet to 4,500 feet. So their deposit's really deep, which you're just not going to create an open pit like that. And you don't have to because of the way the ore is shaped. So it's all about how the universe a billion years ago decided to blah this up into the crust. That's a technical term, by the way, Cal. Blah.
I like it.
Yeah,
I like
yeah.
it. Yeah.
Hey.
Yeah. It allows people like me to understand. So
Blah.
keep them coming.
Hey,
But
I fixed my camera.
yeah, so it is. I think our listeners understand that not all things are created equal, right? We talk about in like the wildlife management aspect, like there's no one size fits all model. Yeah, fish limits are. Yeah, or there's a lot of Montana that's inch away from a high desert, and you can't take the way we manage things over here and apply it to like the Shenandoah Valley, right?
It's hard to look at that though sometimes because I joke that normal people don't live in this world of geochemistry and different things like that. So it's sometimes easy for us to forget that normal people they don't speak the same language, right? There's nothing worse than listening to geologists talk. And I say that with love, but I feel like they could swap out dog breeds for the names of different rocks. And I would just the Dalmatian era. Yeah, I bet. And the Pomeranian. Yeah. They're just, so sometimes I think those of us in mining, even we get so used to how we speak in our little bubble that we forget normal people don't live in that bubble and think regularly about what's going on underground. That's an error on our part.
Oh, I mean, everybody likes things in their own terms, right? And you can't accommodate everybody either. But
no, but we should try to be empathetic and recognize that we have to educate. We can't get upset with people if we aren't educating them.
Yep.
I feel like your world of hunting and fishing is very similar. My husband is regularly teaching me, or trying desperately to teach me, about different rules and regulations and why they're important and what they mean. And he could just be making stuff up. He uses jargon I don't know. So
and they can change every couple of years.
Yeah, that doesn't
minimum, right? So
true enough.
Yeah. It's always a learning process, which is good.
It's good for us.
So, yeah, if it's cool with you, I'd just hit like a lot of I would say the common themes around this Twin Metals project that I hear, we hear. So it's what is the surface water component of a project like this, and downstream effect is certainly something that's on everybody's mind, right?
Absolutely. And so with the boundary waters are different than other waters in that normally when you have a discharge permit from a facility, whether it's a brewery or a wastewater treatment plant or just any kind of discharge into waters, you typically are allowed some level of material to be added to the water that isn't there currently. That's just how our country's Clean Water Act works. And there's limits on things. The boundary waters are special in that there can be nothing. There's no acceptable amount that's allowed to enter the boundary waters.
And that's because of that wilderness designation?
Because it's an exceptional water quality body. So within the state. So Minnesota doesn't mess around with this. So it's not just a factor of seeing what's permissible. There's nothing permissible for water. So Twin Metals is right next to the Birch Lake Reservoir. So we have, if you've seen on the map, there's the big reservoir there. And then so Birch Lake flows into White Iron, flows two other lakes, Farm and Garden, and then Fall Lake, and then that goes to the boundary water. So looking at, when we're looking at discharge from the site, you can't have an impact at the boundary water. So going back up, so one of the things Twin's looking at is actually what water would they have to discharge? Because as I mentioned, they're bone dry below surface, and they have to use water to process. So that's one of the challenges. So it's different. Like, I think a lot of times people look at the taconite mines, and the taconite mines are in a different aquifer, and they have water to discharge, and they're open pit mines. And so they're discharging water to keep their equipment dry. With Twin, when you don't start mining until 400 feet down, any water that's coming into the mine will get pumped back up to the surface to get used in the process water circuit. And then some will go out with the tailings in a dry stack facility. But the vast majority of water that would even come into the mine is just getting circulated in process water. So you don't have a discharge, and they've committed to no process water discharge. The water balance wouldn't support that anyways. There's no water to discharge. And then the other thing would be contact water. So same thing, committed to. So contact water is anything that would come in contact with ore, and that would include any water coming into the underground mine. So they made a commitment to not discharge any of that as well. So you don't have a traditional discharge point. Like, if you think of, I'm trying to think of an equipment, well, like the taconite mines, and I'm sure some of the mines out west, I'm not super familiar with them, but they might have an NPDES discharge point. But Twin wouldn't have that, so you don't have that discharge out to Birch Lake. So then when you're looking at surface water, that's the obvious one. But then there can be questions on water quantity. Do you need to use any water from Birch Lake to maintain your water levels in the process? The other thing is protecting wetlands on surface. So speaking of surface water, a lot of times people think of like the big rivers and lakes, and I'm not saying you did, but we're not just the land of 10,000 lakes, we're the land of even more wetlands. I think only Florida, Alaska, and Louisiana have more wetlands than we do in Minnesota. So then that's the other thing, is protecting the wetlands. And one of the things Twin has is 100 some piezometers already out in the wetlands, trying to understand how the water levels fluctuate with rain. Or we're kind of in a little bit of a drought here right now, but because if you have an underground mine, are there connections to the surface from the underground mine that could draw down those wetlands? So that's the other thing with surface water. It's not the obvious stuff sometimes, as far as any constituents getting out in the water. It's also, are you affecting water levels in the wetlands that are above the mine? And are you affecting water levels in Birch Lake somehow? Are there any fractures or faults that actually do have a meaningful connection to the underground mine? So there's just all of those things that have to get factored in.
Yeah,
Was
it
that a
quickly
lot?
sounds.
I apologize if that was a lot, Cal.
Well, no, I mean, it is a lot, but it kind of is like, well, why is this worth it? How much is down there? Like, who can make a living doing this?
So it's about a quarter of Minnesota's total copper nickel resources. And we do the Duluth complex, which this is part of, is one of the world's largest untapped resources of copper nickel. So it's actually the vast majority of nickel in the US is there in the Duluth complex. So not just the Twin project, but Twin project's about a quarter, or the proposed project that they had in 2019. They don't currently have a proposed project. They don't currently have leases. But the project they proposed in 2019, it's about a quarter of the Duluth complex. So the Duluth complex is about a third, give or take, of this nation's copper, almost all of the nickel, and then almost all of the cobalt, actually. So it's a massive deposit. And I look at it like, if it wasn't a significant deposit, we wouldn't see the investment we've seen in it, and we wouldn't, they've drilled 2 million feet of drill core to understand that deposit. If it wasn't worth it, they wouldn't have done that, and they wouldn't still be sticking around. So it's,
yeah, and what's the price per foot of drill core?
Oh my God, I can't even imagine. It's cool though. They have I keep saying when you come to Ely, I'm just going to keep pushing on you to come to Ely. Um, they have a huge core shed where you can see the walls full of, they have all the core in the building, but it's a mind blowing amount, and it's a huge deposit, and it's, we've known about it since the 60s, and people have been, you know, poking around trying to figure out how big that resource is for a long time, and we haven't had underground mining since the 60s, and it's that's a whole different, we have all these open pit mines, but we don't have any underground mines, so that's a whole learning curve there, and I get claustrophobic, so don't ask me if I'm going to work in the mine. I,
Well,
I panicked going through Mammoth Caves, and they had Fat Man's Misery and Tall Man's Misery, and I'm like, yep, I am not enjoying this. I am quite miserable right now, so I don't think underground mining is for me, but it is for other people. They love it.
the Tamarack project that's on the list has a current contract with Tesla for 75,000 metric tons of nickel.
Yeah, that project has, so the Tamarack intrusion, I'm sorry, I'm really kind of geeking out a little bit.
Yeah, do. Yeah.
Forgive me. So there's the Duluth complex, and then there's the Tamarack intrusion. So those are two separate, they're separated by 6 million years, still part of the mid-continent rift. And the Tamarack intrusion is actually a high grade nickel. So they just hit, oh, they're going to yell at me, over 20% nickel in one of their drill cores. And there's rumors that the Smithsonian's interested actually in it because it's crazy high grade nickel. So they have that deal with Tesla. And so, we do see Tesla switching out to more lithium iron phosphate batteries, but they also have their deposits different, and they actually have the iron you could use for lithium iron phosphate batteries as well. So they're still working with Tesla on not just the nickel, which is still going to be used in batteries as we go forward, but also those lithium iron phosphate. Battery chemistry is fascinating. And we're going to
And
have to figure it out because we're going to need to figure out storage
well,
of
yeah, it's the
energy.
direction that we're heading. That's what
Yeah.
everything I see says.
Yeah. How do you get batteries? How do we power a nation? How do we power a world? It's a fascinating time to be in mining and metals.
Well, yeah, and I saw there was some reference to recycling, and just full disclosure, I was a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle Saturday morning cartoon kid, right? And they kept telling us like recycle your batteries, and then as an adult, I find out that you basically can't recycle batteries, double A's and triple A's, right?
Yeah, so your regular alkaline batteries, your kind of normal, I'm saying this as a redhead who got called copper top as a kid, but your regular like Duracell copper top batteries and Energizer,
Yeah.
yeah, unfortunately those aren't, but the lithium batteries, the nickel cadmium batteries, all your power tool batteries, those are all those rechargeables can be recycled, and they have to be, it drives me. So I worked 13 years at an iron mine, and my husband still is a steel worker at one. And I feel like if people truly understood what it takes to ever get a metal product out of the ground and into the actual metal into a product, they would recycle stuff more. I think that statistic is 1 in every 1,000 exploration sites actually becomes a mine. And this world is finite. So if it takes that much to ever find a resource in the first place and use it, and it takes thousands of people to make it into a product, oh my God, why are we throwing these things in landfills? And, especially the lithium and the nickel and all of that stuff. Minnesota has a huge commitment to figuring that out. So we actually have the state of Minnesota created a materials recycling task force solely focused on improving our metal recycling and understanding some of those challenges. If you live in a rural area like I do, you take your garbage to what's called a canister site that then goes to the county landfill, and it's this whole thing. But they only accept batteries once a year on Has Waste Day.
Mm-hmm.
So you're hoarding your stuff and then taking it in, or you're going to a Best Buy or something like that to take your electronics. And so Minnesota's saying, how do how do we fix this? Because you know, people are just throwing cables and other stuff into their bags and just throwing them in the garbage. Given what it takes to permit a mine, given what it takes to find the minerals in the first place, why the heck are we letting these things go into landfills? So I'm super proud of our state for being like, hey, we're not going to keep letting these things go into landfills. We're going to find a way to make it where it's just as easy to get rid of your metal recycling, electronics recycling as it is anything else. Like they're trying to dummy proof it because people, like environmental has always been a huge priority for me. My mom is a huge environmentalist. Like, so for me, recycling is just what you do. But to normal, like average people, they're busy chasing kids. They're busy, like maybe they're sick. Maybe they have a life. Maybe they just have other stuff going on. And we have to make it easy for them to recycle because you don't get a circular economy if you're just letting everything go into a landfill. And it just, honestly, like I said, spending 13 years at a mine 24/7, seeing what these folks do at mines, to me, it's disrespectful to the workers to not recycle. It's disrespectful to the earth because you cut her open and you said, give me your metals and I'm just going to throw them back in as waste. Like that is just, to me, the hugest insult we can do with things. And I just went on my soapbox and I'm
Oh,
sorry.
that was great. Oh, I mean,
It's just, it's just
it's
personal
somebody
to me.
else this week instead of just me. That's perfect.
It's, we just struggle as a nation. We're a consumer nation. We buy too much stuff. We don't treat the stuff we have well. It's disposable. It's planned obsolescence is my greatest enemy. And we have to do better because mining, no matter what, mining is always it's a cut on the earth. And it's only 2025. There's 8 billion people on the earth, I think, last time I looked. I'd like to think we're going to be around a lot longer, which means if we want to have the quality of life we have a lot longer, we have to start managing our materials better so that people down the road don't hate our guts.
Absolutely. And I so we just had an act. Trout Unlimited was huge on this, and it's going to kind of come back to water, right? But it's regarding like the cleanup of abandoned mine sites, so we don't have these downstream effects when you have flash floods, things that happen to these mine areas that basically have been biohazard off, not biohazard, but have
often concerns. Yeah.
Yep. And one thing that we talk about is how do we have to take a leap of faith as a consumer of the outdoors that we can have any one of these projects in a way that is sustainable. And then we also have to have like the leap of faith that it's going to get cleaned up once the extraction period has ended. And can you talk about how that works? And just so you know, I know you haven't been listening to the show very long, but we talk often about how there's good actors and bad actors in everything. Doesn't matter. Pick your pursuit, pick your industry, whatever. There's plenty of hunters that I would be proud as hell to be lumped in with, and there's plenty of hunters out there that I'm like, oh, I'm not part of that crew, So
no, you're 100% right, and I like that you said leap of faith. I've never thought of it that way before, and I know they're working on the Good Samaritan laws for out west for mining companies to start cleaning up other people's messes that they left, and it's so, I don't even know what the right word for it is, frustrating, whatever. It sucks when you there we go, we'll just go real technical term. Your listeners are like, wow, she sounds really professional, but it sucks when you look at what people did in the past, and from an industry perspective, it sucks because you're like, you buggers, you made it harder for everyone that follows in your footsteps because we're going to get compared to what you did, and often without any regulation. So I worked on a site doing so in Minnesota we have the voluntary cleanup program, and you get legal coverage to clean up someone else's mess. So we don't like it was private land, so things are different. I know out west with so much public land, it's its own thing. But I worked on a project where we were cleaning up a mine that closed in 1964, and they had left their shops. And so back then they used leaded grease, they had PCBs, they had all sorts of really not fun things to clean up. And so you can see this is what happens when you don't have regulations, because Minnesota had no mining regulations until 1980, and that was only for iron mines. And then our regulations for non-ferrous came out in 92. And so,
Wow.
yeah, which I isn't that long ago. So
No.
iron mines, I mean, so the mine I used to work at had already been running for 4 years before Minnesota even had reclamation rules. And so I sometimes have to, when I worked on that project where that mine had closed in 64 and we were cleaning up the shops, I had to keep telling myself and my coworkers, this is what they did pre-regulation, which is why we have regulations. Like, we can be mad. This is what people did. They had their back 40. It's no different than what homeowners did, right? Where they just threw, the joke. So I grew up on a small farm, and the classic line was that, well, yeah, when you change out the oil in the tractor, you put it on the road so you keep dust down. Like, that was, and it's like trying to understand how people have changed over time. But so in 92, 93, when the state came up with its non-ferrous regulations, one of the things they said is, we do not want to have happen here what happened out west. So the Minnesota mining reclamation rules are very specific on, here is what you have to do for your stockpiles. If you have stockpiles, here's the cover you have to have. Here's what you have to have for, just even shaping the piles. And then we have our own wetland rules, and that's a whole different beast. But the big thing they did that I'm really happy about is they have financial assurance. So they said, we do not want to be left holding the bag if one of you starts up and goes bankrupt and leaves. We do not want to count on the state of Minnesota getting the money through bankruptcy proceedings, because those sometimes can just not leave any money for the state to clean up anything. So Minnesota has financial assurance requirements that say, before you can put a shovel in the ground, you have to give us money to clean up whatever you do. And so it's water treatment, if needed. It's shaping of stockpiles. It's reclamation of stockpiles if you have any. So Twin doesn't have stockpiles because it's underground, but if you were to have an open pit with stockpiles, it's reclamation, it's raising of buildings. And so it factors in all of those things you would need to pay. And it allows money for the state to hire a contract or a consultant to manage it for the state, which I think was a really smart addition. So it's contractor fees, it's the whole beast, and they have to give it to the state in irrevocable. The state can't lose it. It's not dischargeable through bankruptcy. It's cash. It's irrevocable letters of credit, bonds, things like that. And it has to get re-upped every year. So every year the DNR, in our case, Department of Natural Resources, I know every state's different. The DNR and the company say, have you opened up new land? Have you built new stockpiles? What have you done? Or it can work backwards. Have you reclaimed a stockpile? Okay, we don't have to do that. So then that amount gets adjusted every year. So that's one of the things Minnesota did to try to prevent exactly what you've seen out west, where people just went bankrupt. And I think to me, that's critical. And one of the reasons that I feel better about the projects personally. But I also think just having people engaged makes me feel better about the projects. Like we have groups that care enough to challenge and ask and push and hold the agencies accountable. And there's a lot of value in that. And in a lot of other places, I mean, in the US you have a say, but other places around the world don't have that. And I think those awkward, tough conversations are good for us.
Just a funny memory on the outreach side of things. I had a friend who was a geologist for Midas Gold, and
Yeah, I've heard of them. Yeah.
one of the community outreach things that they would continually do is they would set up little presentations where they'd let kids pan for gold, but Midas was pulling like microscopic gold out of the ground in Idaho. So they actually had to buy gold that was big enough for the kids to see.
Yeah, because you can buy
Right.
those kits. You can buy those kits online. Yeah.
Because but that was like their outreach. Like, this is how we engage the community and have those conversations and get buy-in to the project in that area.
I'm trying to picture ours is like we couldn't do that with ours. Ours would be really boring. It's one of the things I loved about working in iron mining because the ore is actually magnetic. So that one was a lot easier to go to kids and be
They're
like,
like, that's
here's a
neat.
chunk of rock. Look, magnets stick to it. This is how we separate it. Our stuff
Yeah.
is not as exciting, but I probably
Uh,
shouldn't admit that.
so when we're talking about, I guess, twin metals specifically, is the mate aside from just the proximity, is the major concern in the processing then after the ore has come out of the ground?
I don't know if it's specific to that or if it's just a general. When I talk to folks, they're just concerned in general, and
Yep.
a lot of folks do think it's going to be an open pit. And a lot of folks think that there's also going to have a conventional tailings basin versus a dry stack, which is where you pulled out a lot of the moisture. And so you don't have a dam in this case, but a lot of folks don't recognize that yet. It's really the proximity. And it's just you've been to the Boundary Waters. It is not a normal place to visit. And I feel weird saying that to someone from out west, where when I go out west, I'm like, oh my God, this is magical. But Boundary Waters is magical. And it's not a place where we think rationally. So when we had a huge windstorm back in 99 that like decimated the northern part of the Boundary Waters, which you may have seen some of evidence of that when you visited, if you went into the Gunflint, we didn't react like it was just a normal storm. It's a bigger thing than that. It's a spiritual thing to us. It's a whole different place. So when you talk about putting a mine that has a sulfide ore, like all conversations start from that place of fear of what it would do to the Boundary Waters. And that's a challenge we have. And it's a tough conversation. So it doesn't necessarily matter if it's underground or open pit. You know, I don't know if that makes a difference to people unless you can really go into detail and start pulling out schematics and showing things. I don't know if most people know the difference between a conventional tailings basin and a dry stack. Once again, I feel like you need schematics. The processing itself, most people don't have any experience with the processing of the ore, so I don't know if that one actually ever really rises to the top level of concern as much as just the mine in general. So it's a hard one.
And then like overall footprint, like support and everything else for a project of this size. How substantial is that?
Well, and that's where it gets funny too, because coming from a rural area, I think my sense of scale is probably skewed compared to normal people. So the dry stack facility would have the largest footprint, and that's 500 acres they had proposed in the mine plan. So 500 acres sounds, I think, to some people like a very big footprint. But when you look at like the mines on the Iron Range, their tailings basins are 6, 7, 8,000 acres. So a 500 acre is pretty small. Just like the scale of mining is pretty small, it's 18,000 tons a day. The taconites are, 100,000 tons plus a day. So even like that sense of scale. And when you look at, in a public land setting, 500 acres sounds huge. And they're like, well, Minnesota's got, where are we at? 5 million, I think, acres of public land. No, it doesn't sound right. It's more than that.
Well,
24%
I mean,
of
you're
our state.
talking to a lot of whitetail folks, right? Who,
Yeah.
when they hang themselves to a tree, you can put a lot of folks on a small chunk of ground. So
That sounds terrible the way you phrase that. And I think public lands is a weird thing here too because we have so many private, like hunting here is, I think, different than it is out west, where a lot of people have like hunting shacks here and have private lands. And do you folks have that kind of thing where a lot of your hunting is done on private lands?
sure, we always talk about like public and private, but I think it's fairly abnormal to not cross the fence one way or the other, at least during some point in your season.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, we took a friend of ours into the Bob Marshall Wilderness. A friend of ours drew a mountain goat tag in there. And we all went in for a little over 10 days. And one of our friends, born and raised Montana dude, that was his first public land hunt. And he was probably late 40s at the time.
Yeah.
And he just grew up surrounded by big ranchers, and that's how they did everything. But I was pretty blown away by that. So I would call him the exception to the rule. But
and here I feel like it's a lot of private land hunting. We have some public land hunting. The Superior National Forest is 3 million acres. So when you look at the twin footprint of the 500 for the dry stack, the building itself, it's small. I know I'm going to screw up how big the building is. But it makes a huge difference to have an underground mine versus a surface mine. And it makes a big difference to have dry stack. A dry stack of 500 acres is a fraction of what you'd have with a conventional tailings basin, where it has to be big enough for the tailings to go out and settle, the clean water to get pumped back. Like, it's just a totally different structure. So, yeah.
As a trade organization, how do you allow membership? Right? Like, basically what I'm getting at is, do you ever deny membership?
No one has ever wanted to be a part of us that we wouldn't want to be a part of us, I guess, if that makes sense. So we've never had it come up yet. So I know what you're saying. Oh, you mean like for big companies? Sorry, like we were established with our big corporations. You meant like our mining projects. I was thinking like our support
mining
I'm
because
sorry. I'm sorry, I misunderstood.
Oh no, I'm a confusing guy. Because oftentimes we say, hey, we are self-aware. We need this stuff out of the ground, but can't we get it from someplace else instead of here? We're not anti-mine. We're just anti this particular mine and this particular spot. Does Mining Minnesota ever find yourself in that position?
We haven't yet. So, for us, the Twin project's a good project. And so that one has been an easy one for us. And, New Range, same thing. Talon, we feel good about. But we have had conversations. If we had a company propose a project and we thought they were shady and we didn't feel good about it, this is where I live. I've lived in northern Minnesota my whole life. This is where I'm going to die. I already have a niche at the columbarium with my husband. Like, this is where I'm going to stay. And I am not going to put, my master's is water resource sciences. Like, this is what I've done my whole life is environmental work. I will not accept a company where I don't sleep at night. Like, if Twin was to go through and they started just proposing sorry, I don't want to give you an explicit rating on your thing. If they started proposing a not good project, the other thing is that our other member companies would say, hey, look, we're investing in your voice. We do not want you to be the voice of this company, or, secondary voice. So there's that, I have a board of directors. So on my board of directors, I have the companies, but we also have a strong union presence. We have 3 unions that are on our board of directors. We have an energy company. We have, other consulting firms. Our reputations all rest on the projects that we support. We're not going to support projects we don't feel good about. If Twin was located anywhere else in the country, Twin would have already been mined out. Like, that project is well thought out. They care. They're focused. it's where it's located. So it's not an issue of if it's a good company or good project. It's a matter of this is just where it's located. And these are the challenges solely because of that. So that's the big thing, is that luckily we haven't had to wrestle with that yet. But maybe somebody else starts exploration, maybe a different company comes in, and it's really about, I need to sleep at night, and I need to know that I'm not going to waste my I've worked, I'm way too old to lose my credibility on a project. So
I was speaking with a young fella who's I would guess a sophomore, maybe junior at the max at School of Mines in Colorado, and I had brought up the idea, and I think it's something that gets used, right? Like when we talk about these moratoriums, there's a lot of ways to think about those, but I think about them in, okay, if it's really a moratorium, what we're saying is we recognize what's in the ground as valuable, but we're going to kick the can down the road until something else comes along that makes whatever that resource is more worthwhile to extract right now. So I think about it in terms of like new technologies that come on the scene that make whatever that is easier to deal with, cleaner on the environment. Something that reduces the overall footprint. And in this case, with this fella I was talking about, we were talking about oil, right? And he's like, well, at the end of the day, oil is always going to weigh the same. And I was like, oh, yeah, I guess that's true.
I never would have thought of it like that.
But where can you just talk to the practices, technology side of things of we've got to be mining cleaner and better now than we were 100 years ago, right?
Oh, no, yeesh. Yeah, it's not even a question. One of the things is we care now. We have a Clean Water Act. Like that alone, I think it's really hard for folks born after the Clean Water Act to fully recognize what that did for our nation. And that was a bipartisan effort. That was Richard Nixon. Like that was, and I'm proud to say, my congressman at the time, Congressman Oberstar, was one of the authors of that. And that was game changing. So that's a big part of it, is that we actually just pay attention now. So we actually have regulations. We also have control of waste. Even just how do we manage any materials we generate, and how do we manage that stuff? But you look at equipment. Twin had proposed, now there's electric vehicles. The big companies. I'm not going to start naming brands because I feel like that's a whole different issue. But there are companies that make electric vehicles for use underground versus having diesel powered equipment where you're dealing with big ventilation systems that are necessary for worker safety, things like that. So Twin had looked at, evaluated electric vehicles. One of those things, though, with those electric vehicles is the power of GPS and the power of controlling where you mine and understanding where you mine real time. It was cool working at an iron mine where they had the big dispatch system set up, and it's all polygons based on a block model of the ore, and the shovels know exactly where they're digging. They know exactly what what they need to do. The trucks know exactly where they're going. All of that stuff is so controlled. Versus in the old days, it's like, it looks like the rock we want. Okay, now it's all just that ability to even just manage where you go, what you do, understand where water's coming in, and just even the mapping of fractures in the rock. So one of the big things that Twin had to do is looking at drill holes to understand where are there naturally occurring fractures, and then do Packer tests and do different surge tests and see where are those fractures connected, and just all of that mapping and understanding. Like we've just so improved GIS and GPS capabilities. I think it's a huge thing. And understanding metallurgy. So doing material characterization before you ever start mining, and you are artificially weathering the rock to see what's coming out of it. How much acid, how much how much is the risk of acid generation, and what's your neutralization potential? So even just those setups that they work with the labs to do, huge advantage. Dry stack's relatively new versus conventional tailings. So there's just, we've learned in painful ways, right? You brought up Berkeley Pit earlier. That was a lesson. So it's not a great lesson to learn, but it was a lesson. And we've had other painful lessons the industry's had to learn, and not just from our industry, but just in general, right? Humans, how we do highway projects, how we do other things. Like, we have to keep improving equipment. But that's the big things I see, are just those capabilities of just that knowledge, the ability to generate knowledge and the ability to do something with that knowledge has been, to me, the biggest improvement I've seen in the 20 years I've been in this industry. And it's going to be, who knows where we're going to be in the future. But, I think, back in the old days, they had the boundary waters, they had that mineral, they had that buffer created for a reason. And our deposit, the twin deposits out of that region. And so we look at most people have never even seen what they proposed to do, because it never got into environmental review. It was stuck in scoping. So that's the other thing, is if a project doesn't actually go into environmental review, how do you ever really learn all of those super nerdy things?
Yeah, I mean, there's got to be, I think, right on the investment side of things, there's got to be a higher likelihood that the project's going to happen in order to pony up the cash to do that further research, right?
Yeah, because during environmental review is typically where you do really, I mean, they started baseline monitoring back in, early 2000s. But doing some of that other development is done partly as you go through scoping environmental review. You also are required to do an alternatives analysis and scope and environmental review that says, and that's multiple people that contribute to alternatives analysis. Like, well, do you need to put the dry stack there? How about put the dry stack there? How about this? How about that? Do you need to run that kind of equipment? And all of those things kind of get hashed out, which is how that system was designed to be used for, as far as environmental review goes. It's an important process, and because that's the state and the feds and the tribes, and it's everybody contributing to that process of questioning.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to imagine, like, getting into this business from a planning point of view.
It's nuts. It's so much more complicated. Even iron, which some people think iron's simple. I'm like, no, nothing is simple. Mining is complicated. I hate the image of the pickaxe and shovel. I want to throw that pickaxe at people when I see that as a logo, because I'm like, we are not that simple. We are highly technical. For people that are super into technology and just STEM stuff, I'm like, oh my God, go into mining. The engineering is insane. I'm sure when you talk to that student from Colorado School of Mines, you start asking what they're learning in their classes, and you're like, oh, this is not what I thought. I know that's how it was for me getting into mining.
But yeah, that's definitely why I'm on the question asking side of things.
I mean, I love it as a water resources person to get to do geochemistry and hydrogeology and all of the, and the surface water hydrology stuff. Like, it was awesome. And now, in this role, getting to kind of look at all these different projects and learn about them. And like I said, living here where the projects are not that far away, it's a cool place to be as a water resources scientist, to just better learn this stuff, because I want clean energy to happen, and I know it takes a ton of copper, and more than a ton of copper. It takes a lot of copper. And how do we get that? What does that even look like?
Well, yeah, it's something I can kind of struggle with as well when we talk about, like, the not in my backyard type of mindset. I would definitely be a kick the can down the road type of person. Like, there's got to be something better to make me 100% sure that'll come up in the future. But, like, I love hunting in Sonora, Mexico. And when I go down to Sonora, in the background of almost every moment of the day, you just hear explosions going off in the
What?
copper mines.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, so
And
that's one definite advantage of an underground mine is having it with a 400-foot crown pillar at the top of the mine. There's a lot of noise absorption happening in 400 feet of rock, of
yeah.
granite. Granite that makes beautiful countertops. Not that I'm trying to sell countertops from northern Minnesota. However, we do have companies selling it. No, and that is, I mean, so the noise is a concern. The other thing is Twin worked with the Dark Skies folks to develop for the processing plant and the dry stack facility, a Dark Skies friendly lighting plan, because that's the other, issue. It's the noise and what's the potential light, because you don't want light pollution, which frankly, I wish every city had to work with the Dark Skies folks to figure out a lighting plan for everything in this country.
Oh, yeah.
But so those are the other things that have to be evaluated through environmental review is we don't want to hear the mine. We don't want to drive from a distance and see. I mean, it's a little weird because there's a city, so you're already going to see the city of Ely right there, but you don't want to see the mine next door to it. So it's evaluating all of those things. Environmental review and evaluate socioeconomic, make sure there's environmental justice is taken into consideration. There's just all of those different factors because we didn't always have this process. And we had mines go in places where no one had a say, and they left, and they did things that make it a lot harder to open a mine today, even for the best intentioned folks.
Well, yeah, and there's always a trade too. A lot of people use the reclaim coal land in West Virginia as an example, and I hunted on some of that this spring for turkeys, and to me, it's like gorgeous woods. I'm not a deciduous tree guy. I grew up with pines, right? And so I'm always blown away by green and diversity. But there was like a trade-off there, right? Where it was like, when we scraped this mountain, nothing was going to live here for 30 years, 60 years.
Unless you reclaim it. Yep.
Yeah, and until that reclamation process happens.
Yeah, and that's why Minnesota also requires you have 10-year standards for reclamation. So by 10 years, it has to be like reclaimed. So you have 1 year, you have 1, 3, 5, and 10-year numbers that you have to meet for percent cover and for native vegetation.
And that's, but I guess what I'm saying is like we, as like the consumer, taxpayer, environmentalist that consumes batteries left and right, like really knowing what the trade-off is, like what are we going to get for what we're giving up, is hard to find a lot of times
because we're so shielded from it. It's like I said, I grew up on a small farm, and my dad had a meat processing plant. I couldn't hide from where meat came from. I had, and he was a big hunter, and he would, if he was still alive, he'd be ecstatic I was doing something like this with someone like you. But it's, so when we ate food, we always knew what it was, except for when my dad told me that rabbit was chicken so that I didn't cry. That was different. But it was, you knew it because it was in your world. And one of the things I love about living on the Iron Range is for me to go get groceries, I drive past an open pit mine. It's 8.5 miles long. I see an open pit mine. I know where my steel comes from, and I know what that means to the earth. And it's one of the things I love about living in rural America is that this stuff, not just on an intellectual level, but on a visceral level. And I think it makes you better at taking care of the stuff you have. We are super disconnected from stuff, and we don't always understand there's a cost to everything. Recycling sounds great, but recycling facilities need air permits and need water permits and need haz waste licenses and need all of that. So there's a cost to recycling. There's a cost to flipping on a light switch. There's just all these things, and we're so shielded from that for the most part. and I think it makes us sloppy as consumers, and I think it just makes us sloppy as citizens too, to not be fully engaged in where stuff comes from. I live in a big logging area too. It's the same thing. I know where pulp and paper comes from because before they fixed the scrubber systems, it used to smell like sauerkraut in that town. And not great sauerkraut. Like, I'm Polish, I should like the smell of sauerkraut, but it was,
Yeah, not
and
that
so,
kind.
no, they ain't that kind. But I knew where paper came from, and I still see logging trucks on the daily where I live. And I wish I'd never seen Final Destination, but that's a different. But it's like, and that's one of the times I try to talk to a lot of folks in the urban areas because they are disconnected. Minnesota's a huge farming state, and yet people don't know that American Crystal sugar packets are from sugar beets grown in western Minnesota. And like, just making that connection between the land gives us everything. The land gives us our food, the land gives us our clothes, the land gives us our paper, the land gives us our metals. We should know what that cost is to the land. And we've grown separate in so many areas, and we can't be that way because it makes us sloppy.
Julie, you sound like you would sign up for my idea that when you go into the grocery store, before you put something in your cart, you have to watch an educational video.
Love that idea. I mean, honestly, like, having to work in a meat processing plant as a kid is probably illegal, but beyond, my dad's gone now, so they can't do anything about it. But I knew what a hanging cow looked like. I knew what a hanging pig looked like. Like, bacon is delicious, but I understand what it takes to grow them, right? Like, bottle feeding calves and, chasing piglets around so that we could cut off their tails because they're like puppies and they eat each other. They're just, anyways, pigs are fun. But like, yes, I do think we should have to watch videos because I think we should understand, one, the distance much of our food has traveled. Like, do we need to eat food that has traveled that far? Like, what is the carbon footprint of your diet? Like, we should be thinking about those things, and we should be asking the ethical. It's one of the reasons like I said, my husband hunts and fishes. I feel good about the walleye we eat because I know he hates wanton waste. I know he's an ethical, like, angler. I know he's an ethical hunter. He cares for the animal, and that's important to me. And we should be like that with what we do upon the earth because we're one human. Our impact should be small, and it's not always.
It is not always. Julie, we're going to have to chat with you again once we.
Be in Bozeman in a month.
All right.
So,
well, here's a tip for you: don't wear a felt cowboy hat. It's not the season.
Duly noted.
My my buddy's mom will like attempt to get up and walk across a restaurant to tell somebody that you don't wear a felt cowboy hat in the summer.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's
I love
pretty
it.
funny. Yeah. But no, thank you so much for expanding our knowledge on this subject. I'd love to get in touch with you again once we see how some of these things move.
Yeah.
And I'm sure we'll get something out of Secretary Rollins again here in the near future from the sounds of it. And maybe we can get you back on for an update of what the process is then.
Yeah, that'd be great. I thank you so much for this. This was a delight.
Oh, good. No, thank you very much. Is there any resources that you'd like to point people to? I use on the hunt and angling side of things. I always talk about Sportsman for the Boundary Waters canoe area. What would your if you wanted to show people how to get some more information, do some of their own research on this project, where would a place like that exist?
So I would tell folks just to go to the miningminnesota.com website. So we have our resources page that we're working on building out further with different things. We are working on some educational materials right now, talking about watersheds and some different things. So just our website to start with, and my TEDx is on there. There's some other talks I've given that are on there. And then go right to the Twin Metals website. I think it's It's twin-metals.com. I screw that up every time. But just go right to the site. Their mine plan of operations they submitted is on there back from 2019. Like I mentioned, they don't currently have a project, but if you want to see what they proposed in 2019, just go read it and go scope out the resources directly on the page.
Excellent. Well,
and follow us on LinkedIn and Facebook. There we go. Sorry.
Oh, there you go.
I got to hear my communications coworker being like, Lucas, I can't believe you forgot to tell people.
There's too much to keep up with. I have empathy for forgetting things on that side of deals. But yeah, everybody, thank you so much for listening. If you have questions for Julie, please write into ASKCAL, that's askcal at themeateater.com. I will compile them and we can have Julie back on again, or I can have her answer them and I'll read them back to you, whatever you prefer. So thank you so much for listening. Let us know what's going on in your neck of the woods, and we'll talk to you again next week.